And here are 4 bad ways that we have learned to deal with conflict that now we need to kind of unlearn. Because if we're going to walk in true peace, we got to unlearn some of these bad behaviors that we grew up with. Number 1, this is a bad way of resolving conflict. Number 1 is avoid. All of these start with an A. They should be easy to remember. Number 1 is avoid. I think most of us learned this method of conflict resolution by watching our parents. We learned the old saying like, hey, just keep your head down. Just do what you're told, keep your head down. Perhaps the house you grew up in was a place where fear was kind of the main ruling thing in your house. You lived in fear of your dad or your mom, maybe both. And it was because they had a short fuse. You did any little thing and it was, things blew up. And so what you learned subconsciously, nobody ever had to say it. You don't have to look at each other when I'm talking about this. But if it will, yeah. Anything that you said could turn into an explosive moment. And so what you learn to do is I'm going to avoid conflict by keeping my head down, and I'm going to stay in my room. I'm going to avoid this. Whatever I got to do to keep the peace. A false peace, but that's what I'm going to do. Why? Because I'm avoiding the conflict. I'm avoiding engaging in the conflict. And when you're a little kid, you don't really have a choice. But that's what we've learned, and this is what happens, and hear me on this, we bring that into the marriage. Your spouse or your friend, if you want to talk about relationships, they're not your parents, number 1, but sometimes we treat those relationships the same way because what happens was this is how I learned to get by, and so now that we're married, when anything happens, anytime I see a conflict, even though they don't have the same fuse that my parents had, I'm going to respond the same way, and I'm just going to avoid it. Now, at this point, if you want to kind of elbow your spouse and say, yeah, that's you. You definitely avoid conflict. It's okay. We'll get to everybody else in a minute. Anytime conflict arises, here's a telltale. Anytime conflict arises, you feel sick in your stomach. You refuse to talk. You walk away, you run into your room, you hide. That's avoiding the conflict. Number 2, and this might hit some of us again, is you appease. So the first one's avoid, the second one's appease. The second main way that I've seen people deal with conflict is what you might call a people pleaser. Well, actually, I was thinking about the DISC profile, if anybody's ever taken these DISC profiles. That's an S, right? So what I'm talking about is something that is very ingrained. It gets so ingrained in who we are that it becomes a part of our personality. But you become a people pleaser, okay? You don't engage in conflict, you try to smooth it over. Rather than expressing how you feel, you are the person that gets run over and are constantly hurt. But you refuse to say anything because I just want to maintain this peace. I want to make them happy. People who appease spend most of their life in a place of false peace. It's a false peace because they are not truthful to how they are really feeling. This typically happens in marriages and relationships where one person is really controlling. In order to maintain this false peace, you have to appease that person. Whatever they want, they get. You placate them in order to maintain your false peace. You don't want to upset them, or you don't want them to be disappointed in you. So you appease. Now, if that's your partner, go ahead and just kind of give them a little nudge too. We got more, so don't worry, you'll get nudged. Now, some of you, you don't avoid and you don't appease. Some of you, when I talked about peacemakers engaging in conflict, you're like, yes, I love conflict. That's my favorite thing. I can't wait for you may not have said it out loud, but you were thinking it. But man, I just can't wait to get into some more conflict with my spouse. You are what we would call argumentative. This is typically also a learned behavior. We see our father or our mother, how do they win the conflict? They argue it to death. Have you ever been in a conversation with someone that just wanted to argue, and you were trying your best not to argue? You're like, I don't want to argue. Well, I don't either. Like that sort of thing, right? Like that's the type of argumentative I'm talking about. As we get argumentative, we try to argue the person down in order to get the conflict resolved. You're wrong. I'm going to give you the 10 reasons why you're wrong, and then please just be quiet. You see how these things are sometimes connected between argumentative and maybe the avoidance or the appeaser, right? Number 4, do not, if you heard argumentative, do not do the little elbow thing. Okay? Don't do that. Because as soon as you get out into the parking lot, they're going to be like, what do you mean I'm argumentative? Don't do that. Don't do that. If you didn't get elbowed after this 4th one, you're the argumentative one, just so you know, okay? Your spouse don't need to tell you. I'm telling you. Number 4, accuse. We become accusatory. Lots of us, when we enter into conflict, we like to play what I call the blame game. You guys know what the blame game is, right? This started all the way back from Adam and Eve. Adam enters into sin, and he goes, Lord, it wasn't me. It was that woman that you gave me who made me eat from the apple. That's the blame game. We blame the other person constantly for all of the conflict, problems, and issues in our relationship. We accuse them. It's your fault. If you would just fill in the blank, then our life would be full of peace. But no, you got to leave your clothes. Oh, you got to leave the toilet seat up. Oh, you got accusatory. These are, again, I'm not telling you these are the good things to do, because some of you are like, yes, you need to tell them, right? These are bad ways that we handle conflict. There are many other ways, poor ways of handling conflict, like silent treatment. Some of you know what I'm talking about there. Beating around the